Off you go, Hannah. Tell me when you've done it. It's going. All right, fantastic. So welcome to our, what is it now? Our fifth Elysium workshop. This one is on Ibsen. I've explained how it all works. Before we start, what I always like to ask is very quickly, is there anything anybody wants to ask about Ibsen that you want me to cover? People will know some Ibsen, people know no Ibsen. Some people are here to find out about Ibsen. Others are here to ask questions that they've wanted to ask for 30 years. So if anybody has any question that they want to cover, fire away now, but do unmute yourself first.
Oh yeah. My request, this is probably in your list already.
Okay.
But the thing that interests me most about Ibsen is he's one of the playwrights who cause absolute outrage over absolutely nothing.
No, I don't.
Yeah,
I think we'll get into that. Yes, he did cause huge outrage, but again, it's quite worth looking at why that might be. Just before we go any further, Hannah, Mark Russell's trying to join, but apparently his link isn't working. Is there any way you can contact him and see if you can get him in? Just send him the link again. All right. Okay, so we begin. Yes, Ibsen. So we start with a wonderful speech from my favourite Ibsen play, my personal favourite Ibsen play, which is Ghosts. Now, this is a speech from Mrs. Alving, who's the protagonist of Ghosts. And to me, this speech is the key, or one of the keys to the whole of what Ibsen is all about. So Felicity, when you're ready, take it away.
I almost think we are all ghosts. All of us, Pastor Manders. It isn't just what we've inherited from our father and mother that walks in us. It's all kinds of dead ideas and all sorts of old and obsolete beliefs. They're not alive in us, but they remain in us, more or less, and we can never rid ourselves of them. I only have to read a newspaper, and I see ghosts between the lines. There must be ghosts all over the country. They lie as thick as grains of sand. And we're all so horribly afraid of the light.
Thank you, Felicity. That was wonderful. Lovely. Okay, so why do we study ghosts? Why are we interested in Ibsen? Why is that speech important? So the inspirational thing about Ibsen, and the most important thing about him, is that without Ibsen, we wouldn't have any of the drama that we have now. He was the first playwright to write truly great prose tragedies. No one had done that before. He created naturalistic drama. He inspired Strindberg, he inspired Chekhov, he inspired Wilde, he inspired Shaw, and anything that we read now, which is naturalistic, which is set in a naturalistic place, whether it's a bar or a pub or a house or wherever, is essentially owes a debt to him. That you wouldn't have Look Back in Anger, you wouldn't have Sean O'Casey, you wouldn't have Conor McPherson, anything which is naturalistic. Anything where people talk as real people talk, not in verse, not in heightened language, comes from him. At the same time, he also was inspirational in a more abstract way, which we'll get on when he wrote some of his early plays, which are much more mystical and imaginative and bizarre. He also was a massive inspiration for people like Beckett, the Theatre of the Absurd, Ubu, all those people. But his prime thing was that he founded modern drama. He didn't necessarily intend to do it. He didn't sit there going, I'm going to found modern drama, but he was the one who did it. The interesting thing about it, just on a personal level, I was going to say a few things. The reason why this is a passion project for me is Ibsen has always played a massive part in my life, not least because my father became a theatre director because he saw an Ibsen play in 1959. He saw a famous production of Brand, which is a play we're going to look at very early on. And had he not been inspired by it and wanted to work with the people who did that production, he wouldn't have been a theatre director. He wouldn't have met my mother. I wouldn't have been born. And he wouldn't have founded the theatre that he did. And so mysteriously for me, an unusual childhood, my brother and I grew up with Ibsen as almost a household god. So we were reading Ibsen when we were teenagers because my parents were discussing it over the table. Productions of Ibsen were going on in his theatre. So what you're going to get tonight is about 30 years of reading and studying Ibsen and being obsessed by him, and only quite in my directing, actually directing any of it. And to me, Ibsen is he's what I would call a massively overrated, underrated writer. He's massively admired, but an awful lot of people don't like him and don't understand him and don't like going to see his plays. And also, he's often are completely incomprehensible. The amount of productions I don't like going to see Ibsen plays because I go to see them and quite often your experience is just a lot of people in costumes talking and then the play ends and no one has a clue as to what was going on. So everyone tells you this is a magnificent, wonderful, but quite often the productions don't make a difference for that, which we'll go into in a second. I remember teaching Ibsen and Strindberg to my students in Mountview. Two of them are here tonight, Alice and Danny, who have gone on to do Strindberg for me and are part of my company. And we went to see a production of Ghosts, and it was a truly awful production. And I remember at one point, one of the students turning to me and asking a key question about the two main characters. I'm not going to give it away because we're going to look at that scene later. And asked if what had happened to them was true. And I looked at him, I was slightly white, and I said, look, if you have to ask that question and the production hasn't done its job. And the big thing about Ibsen is people think of Ibsen as an intellectual playwright. They think of him as a playwright about talking, not action. They think about it as a bourgeois playwright, as a playwright who doesn't have any real kind of energy to him. And Ibsen himself absolutely refuted that. A famous quote that he made was, I am a passionate man, or I'm a passionate playwright, and my plays need to be done with passion. And one of the missions I have, and we'll hopefully find it at the end of this, is to show that these plays are full-blooded, passionate, sexy, energized, feeling plays that done properly shouldn't bore you or mystify you, but should absolutely blow you away. He was the great dramatist of family dramas. He knew how to unpick marriages. He knew how to unpick relationships in a way that nobody else did. And the reason why I brought up Felicity's speech is that what he was writing about, well, we'll get onto that in a second, because it's slightly more complicated than I was about to get to there. The big thing I also want to say is that the versions that we're going to be working on are those by Michael Mayer. Now, Michael Mayer was was a friend of mine. I knew him very well. He was a mentor of mine. He supported me as a young director. And many, many times I used to go and sit with him and we would talk about Ibsen and Strindberg and he would impart wisdom about these plays. And he was the English adapter or translator who really made Ibsen and also Strindberg household names for British theatre. Before the 1940s, or before the Second World War, Ibsen was seen as an odd playwright, a minority playwright, admired by intellectuals, Henry James, Oscar Wilde, Eugene O'Neill, all those people, but not with a massively popular audience. What Michael did was break that down, and he translated all Ibsen's major plays, and they have become since an absolute part of our landscape. They're done all the time. They're still vehicles for great actors. Actresses want to play Hedda Gabler. Actors want to play Brandon Peer Gynt. Directors want to do them. So all over the world, this playwright is done, and part of that in the English-speaking world is thanks to Michael. And the two reasons why the versions are so good and the ones that I still use is, first of all, Michael knew Norwegian, so he knew the original. So he wasn't doing the thing of translating it from someone else's version. He intimately knew the original and the nuances. Actually, the second reason was because he also was an expert on Ibsen. He wrote a legendary 3-volume biography about Ibsen, which won loads of awards in Scandinavia. So he knew the man inside out. When you read the books, it's like he knew him personally. It's not like a normal kind of dry biography. He knows him right down to a T. So he understood his psychology and what motivated him. And all of that goes into these translations in terms of the layers that took place. And the third reason, which I realize now I sound like the Spanish Inquisition, is that he worked with key directors. Two directors in particular, Michael Elliott and Caspar Rader. Michael was the one who did the famous Brand production and went on to do a very famous production of Lady from the Sea with Vanessa Redgrave. But Caspar was a Finnish baron who was also a theatre director. But it was Caspar who mentored Michael and took him through the language and the culture and helped him understand what Ibsen was about in a much, 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 much deeper way. And the point about Ibsen is that he was the playwright who created the subtext. His characters are often deeply inhibited and are hidden about what they're talking about. They're motivated by very powerful energies, often sexual energies, which they don't acknowledge. And they live in a society where these things can't be openly spoken about. So if they come out too overtly, you're in danger. So what you have to do with an Ibsen is go really deep under the surface into the psychology of the characters and work out what they're really saying. So the reason why most of the time you're watching productions where you're going, well, what is going on, is because quite often the actors and the director haven't done that. They don't know what's going on underneath, in which case all you get is blather. And one of the two plays that we're going to really focus on in this one are Hedda Gabler and Ghosts, which to me are the two plays which most of all deal with this subtext and deal with this inhibition. To understand Ibsen, you have to look at, there are two iconic plays right at the beginning of his career. And one of the reassuring things about Ibsen is that well into his 40s, he was a complete failure. He'd written several plays, none of which were remotely successful. And he'd run a theatre for 9 years in Christiania in Denmark, and that had flopped and gone bankrupt. So he was really nowhere. And he managed to rescue his reputation with a play called The Pretenders, which is a little bit like a Shakespearean history play. Brilliant play. As far as I'm aware, it's only been done once in the UK, the production by Danny Boyle at the RSC, which is quite interesting. But the next two plays he wrote, he didn't write for the theatre. He wrote them for the imagination. And they're two epic, poetic plays. And to me, if you want to understand Ibsen, you have to read these two plays, because they show you the two sides of his personality. And almost every single other play in his canon is almost a rewrite of these two themes in these two plays. And these are Brand and Peer Gynt. Peer Gynt is much better known than Brand, but as I say, these two pieces give you the two sides of him. So Brand was the first one that he wrote, and it was a massive success. Everybody read it in booklet form, and in those days, playwrights actually made their money through printing of the books. You didn't necessarily make the money out of the theatre productions. So quite often, and sometimes, the books came out long before the plays appeared. So when Brand came out, everyone read it at home, or they performed it at home. And this was a time when there wasn't any television, so quite often you all got together and you read plays. And Brand was an absolute sensation. It was seen as an extraordinary radical play which suddenly challenged everything, and it's now seen as arguably the greatest verse tragedy since Shakespeare. So Brand's central character is a priest, a rebellious young priest who's grown up in the mountains in Norway, and at the beginning of the play is returning to become the parish priest. Now, he's a Lutheran pastor, which is very different to an Anglican pastor, but he's a kind of fanatic, but he's a genius. He has this extraordinary, potent vision of God and man, which is fearless. And his whole idea is that for human beings to truly realize God in this world, they have to overcome themselves. They have to give all to God. Everything has to be given to God. This all or nothing theory that he has, this passionate belief. So we're going to look at a very early scene in the play. This is where Brand first climbs the mountain, leaving behind his guide, who's too frightened to go on. And he crests the mountain and he looks down into the valley where he remembers his old home. And he encounters two young people, Einar and Agnes, and they're two young, carefree Norwegians. And Einar is a painter. And immediately Brand goes at them about God. And this is the speech. Okay, Danny, when you're ready, Danny and Adam, take it away.
My gay friend, show me this God of yours. You're an artist. You've painted him, I hear. He's old, isn't he?
Well, yes.
Of course. And grey, and thin on top, as old men are. Kindly, but severe enough to frighten children into bed. Did you give him slippers? I hope you allowed him spectacles and a skull cap.
What do you mean?
That's just what he is. The God of our country, the people's God. A feeble dotard in his second childhood. You would reduce God's kingdom, a kingdom which should stretch from pole to pole, to the confines of the church. You separate life from faith and doctrine. You do not want to live your faith. For that you need a God who will keep one eye shut. That God is getting feeble like the generation that worships him. Mine is a storm, where yours is a gentle wind. Inflexible, where yours is death, all loving, not all doting. And he is young and strong like Hercules. His is the voice that spoke in thunder when he stood bright before Moses in the burning bush, a giant before the dwarf of dwarves. In the valley of Gideon, he stayed the sun and worked miracles without number, and would work them still if people were not dead like you.
And now we are to be created anew.
Yes, as surely as I know that I was born into this world to heal its sickness and its weakness.
Do not blow out a match because it smokes before the lantern lights the road. Do not destroy the old language until you have created the new.
I do not seek to create anything new. I uphold what is eternal. I do not come to bolster dogmas of the church. They were born and they will die. But one thing cannot die: the spirit, not created but eternal, redeemed by Christ when it had been forfeited in the first fresh spring of time. He threw the bridge of human faith from flesh back to spirit's source. Now it is hawked around piecemeal, but from these stumps of soul, from these severed heads and hands, a whole shall rise which God shall recognize. Man, his greatest creation, his chosen heir, Adam, young and strong.
Good, thank you. Brilliant. Okay, so the power of Brand is that Brand goes all out for his vision. He gets married, he has a child, but as the play moves on, his vision, his idea that all or nothing is you mustn't compromise. You must live fully. You must absolutely commit to who you are. He starts to sacrifice everything, and his passion loses him his wife. It loses him his daughter, his son rather, who dies because they can't feed him, and ultimately he's left alone in the late years of his life. It's one of these extraordinary plays which carries. It starts with him as a young man, he becomes middle-aged, and it ends with him older. And at the end of the play, he ends up being rejected by his own parishioners and chased up a hill. And he finds himself with his final confrontation on a mountaintop with God and all sorts of spirits that try to make him give up everything he stood for. And he realizes too late that what's inspiring about him, which is in his integrity and his passion, is actually destroyed his heart. And at the end of the play, his final lines, he's faced, there's an avalanche, and he's as the snow comes down to destroy him, he cries out to God, if not by will, how may man be redeemed? And just as he's destroyed by the avalanche, the voice of God speaks, he is the God of love. And the inspiration of the drama is that to make it work, you have to see what's extraordinary about Brand. You have to see what's visionary about Brand. He's a great leader and a great man, but at the same time, his obsession means that he destroys everything earthly for him, the chance of a life of the heart. So that's one side of Ibsen, which is this reformist, angry, a passionate man with a profound sense of spirituality. Although he was brought up Christian, he rejected it, but still had a very powerful sense of spirituality. So Brand represents the prophet on the mountaintop. He's like a Nietzsche. He's one of those kind of characters. So the parallel play is Peer Gynt, which he then wrote after that. And this is an extraordinary kind of phantasmagoria, which has trolls in it and the most bizarre. It travels all over the world. You don't know when the last act, whether he's dead or not. He meets the devil, he meets all these other characters. It's like this extraordinary Scandinavian folktale. But the point with Peer is that he's the opposite to Brand, where Brand sacrificed his mortal life for a kind of eternal vision. Peer doesn't want to do anything which might get in the way of his ease. He's a kind of Boris Johnson figure, you might say. But the point about Peer is he's got huge charm and vitality. And the first three acts are about him as a young man in Norway, as this penniless man chasing his fortune. And the second half of the play is about him as an older man. So, and the beauty of him is that he has charm. He has a kind of weird innocence. He's like all of us. He blunders into problems, but he's got the blarney. He's able to talk himself out of them. He's an adventurer and he's a dreamer. That's the biggest thing, is he's a poet. And the speech I'm going to ask Danny to read now is his first kind of fantasy speech. Off you go, Danny. Do you want to? Yeah.
Yeah, 1
So with this sequence, he's going to a wedding feast, and he hears all these people passing by, and they're slagging him off. They're being rude about him.
What a strange cloud. It's like a horse. There's a man on it too, with saddle and bridle. And behind him's an old woman riding a broomstick. It's Mother. She's scolding and screaming, "You brute, stop, Pia!" Yes, now she's afraid. Peer Gynt rides at the head of a mighty army. His horse has a crest of shining silver and 4 shoes of gold. He has gloves on his hands and a sword and a scabbard and a trailing cloak lined with scarlet silk. It's a fine, bold body of men he has with him, but none sits his horse as proudly as he, or glitters as he does against the sun. Crowds throng below as he pass by him. They take off their hats and their eyes gape up at him. The women curtsy, for everyone knows Emperor Peer Gynt and his 1,000 warriors. He scatters sovereigns and shining shillings on the roadside like pebbles. Every man in the parish he'll make as rich as a lord. Peer Gynt rides high over the white sea. The Prince of England stands on the shore and waits for him. And all the maidens of England are with him. The great men of England and the mighty King of England himself rise in homage from their high table as Peer Gynt comes riding. King raises his crown from his head and says,
Good, thank you very much. Lovely. Okay, so you can see the huge difference between Brand and Peers. Brand is full on passion and like a kind of, as someone texted just now to say that Brand means fire. That's what he's like. He is like a brand, and he's aggressive, emotionally aggressive. He challenges people to be their best self and not to be weak and not to be compromised. But Peer is the other thing. Peer dreams. He gets caught up in the moment. And the brilliance of the speech you've just heard is that the rest of the play he pursues that weird fantasy, and you can never tell whether it's actually a drunken fantasy that he's having or whether it's really happening. So Peer goes, the key moment in the first half of the play is Peer finds himself caught up. He ends up gate crashing the wedding, stealing the bride. She accuses him of raping her. He insists that he didn't rape her. And he runs into the mountains and he finds himself taken in by the trolls. And the trolls in Norway aren't like the trolls in England, which are the nice, sweet little creatures or funny creatures of fairy tale. They're much darker. They're all, and he has this incredible scene where he finds himself in this bizarre kind of weird troll-like sex party where they eat shit and piss and they do whatever they like. And the trick of it is that the trolls represent human beings who've completely given themselves up to their appetites, their sexual appetites. And Peer gets very excited about that and thinks it sounds fantastic. And they live as this kind of sort of supernatural animalistic existence. But when they say to him, well, you can become a troll if you want, he's very excited by that. They ask to remove one of his eyes, and then he has to reject his Christianity. In other words, he can't be redeemed. He has to get rid of his soul, and he can't actually do that. So he escapes from them. But the key thing about the trolls is they represent animals. They represent your animal nature. And these are the two massive contrasting aspects of all of Ibsen's plays. People drawn to their passions, to their physical passions, particularly sexuality. But they're also deeply divided, and they also have a profound spirituality. And these two sides of themselves are conflicting all the way through the plays. Now, the brilliance of both Peer Gynt and Brand is that they have the whole span of a man's life. And I remember working with students, and one of them saying, it was Liam, I think it was, Danny, it feels like the play is asking, what is a life? Because at the end of the play, Peer finds himself being judged. At the beginning of the play, he's had this encounter with the trolls. He has an illegitimate child as one of the trolls, and he falls in love with a young girl called Solveig, who he thinks he can make a life with, but he can't because the troll girl comes back with his illegitimate child. So he flees her. But in the second half of the play, he becomes a businessman and he loses his money, and then he becomes a guru and he loses that. And it's all about essentially this man with a massive ego pursuing any kind of success that he can get. And then at the end of the play, he goes through this awful kind of nightmarish purgatorial quest where he has forced to go home as an old man, and he's forced to face up to all the things that he's run away from and the emptiness of his life. And he encounters a character called the Button Moulder. And what Peer is shocked about is he's not evil enough to go to hell, but he's also not good enough to go to heaven. And instead, he's going to be moulded down into a button. Has to prove, he's got 3 chances where he can prove that he's the biggest, most evil person in the world, and he fails to do it. And there's a great line that the Button Moulder tells him. He tells him, you were supposed to be a button on the waistcoat of God, but you fell out of place. In other words, Peer was born with the potential to be a great poet, a great artist, all these different things, but instead he ran, and as a consequence, he never fulfilled his potential. And the end of the play, just at the last crossroads, when he's about to be moulded down, he finds Solveig again, who's now an old woman and she's blind. And they are, he's temporarily saved. So the genius of the 2 plays is that they're the 2 sides of Ibsen, and somehow they deal with the whole of his life. And what we'll see as we go on is that the arc of his life, bizarrely, almost ends with him rewriting these plays. So that his own life ended up like the life of Brand and the life of Peer Gynt. But these characters recur in different ways throughout the plays. So after writing these 2 pieces of work, which were huge successes, instead of writing another weird phantasmagoria, he decided to go back to the theatre and he wrote A Doll's House. Now everyone knows The Doll's House, it's done all the time. Now what he brought in with The Doll's House, this was the first great domestic tragedy that had ever been written. Now this was a time when you had Tolstoy writing, you had the novel, you had George Eliot, Dickens, you had people writing massive texts and wonderfully written novels, but the theatre at the time was still pretty much seen as a popular entertainment. But essentially you had melodramas. They were either melodramas or grand guignol. No one took them seriously. No one was writing heavyweight plays, and for some reason Ibsen decided he was going to do that. And up until then, all drama was written in verse. So you had Shakespeare, you had Schiller, you had Goethe. And the one time someone had tried to write a drama in prose, which was Victor Hugo, there were huge riots. Everyone said, this is disgusting, you can't do this, you can't have characters speaking in prose, it's revolting. So what Ibsen did was go, right, we're not only going to write in prose, but we're no longer going to write about kings and queens or even dukes and nobles. We're going to write about ordinary middle-class people. And A Doll's House is set in a banker's clerk's home. And it's seen as the great feminist play. It's famously what happens is at the end of the play, Nora, who's the wife, walks out on her husband. And the story goes that the sound of the door slamming sent shockwaves all the way through Europe. Ibsen was plugging in at the time to a growing feminist movement, the same energy that people like Flaubert and Tolstoy were plugging into with things like Anna Karenina and Madame Bovary, who were trying to start to write about men writing about women's lives, but also trying to make people understand that women were as complex as men and needed to be understood in the same way. So what Ibsen did was put this onto the stage. But fascinatingly, he insisted that it wasn't a feminist play, even though it's always seen as a feminist play. And there's no doubt that the genius of it is it for the first time creates a major tragic female heroine. And it for the first time unpicks marriage in a tragic way, and it lets the woman find her independence. And the reason why he said it wasn't a feminist play was not because he didn't think that was important. And one of the geniuses of Ibsen was that he wrote brilliantly for women. There's great heroine after great heroine. All his plays have got wonderful parts for women. But his point was that, and we're going to look at the scene in the moment, was that the mission that Nora is on is a mission that everybody should be on. The quest to find out who you are is the quest that every human being should be doing. And that's what he was trying to do. Now, it's an interesting one. I've seen a lot of productions of A Doll's House, and I've only ever seen it done brilliantly once. And the reason why I find productions frustrating is the reason why a lot of Ibsen productions don't work. If you decide to play the ending of the play at the beginning, in other words, if you decide to make Torvald, who's the husband, into a misogynistic fool or an idiot, you kill the drama of the play. The whole point with the story is that the two of them in the first act, they're very invested in their marriage. It's more complicated than it's just a misogynistic or oppressive marriage. There is love between them. It's just one of those marriages where they probably married young, and there's all sorts of things that they haven't been honest with the other one about. So there are secrets in there. But there's also, I've only ever seen it work when Torvald is made to be more than just a monster, there's a decency to him. And then suddenly, Nora's decision to leave him becomes much, much, much more powerful. If he's an idiot, if you play him as an idiot, you sit there going, why has she taken so long to leave him? You know, why is she and in the play, there's a whole sequence where the core of the whole thing is that Nora is blackmailed because she forged a signature to enable money to be loaned to her to save her husband from dying. So she obviously was completely committed. They have a family, they're doing well, they have children that she's very committed to, and so is he. He is a product of his time. He believes in the primacy of the male, he believes in the primacy of the husband, but there's also affection there between the two of them. So it's much more, if you make him into the baddie, you defuse the play. This gets even more interesting when you get into Ghosts. So the famous scene is the very, very end of the play, when Nora realizes at the key moment, when Torvald realizes that she forged this signature, she was hoping and expected him to back her up and say, I understand, I'm with you. Instead, he rejects her. And this causes her a real shock. It's a massive shock. It then emerges that something comes up which means that he doesn't, that in some sense they're out of danger. So he decides, that's all right, I forgive you, everything's going to be fine, and I'm going to now educate you in how to be a moral human being. And to his surprise, she walks on, and this is the dead of night, and she's in leaving clothes. Now this scene is probably where modern drama begins. And what's astonishing about it is the subtlety and the depth of the language where they talk. So off you go, please, Alice and Adam. We've broken this scene into 2 sections, so yeah, off you go.
Oh yeah, so we're just doing the first one,
yeah.
Not running through. Sit down. It's going to take a long time. I've a lot to say to you.
You alarm me, Nora. I don't understand you.
No, that's just it. You don't understand me, and I've never understood you until this evening. No, don't interrupt me. Just listen to what I have to say. You and I have got to face facts, Torvald.
And what do you mean by that?
Doesn't anything strike you about the way we're sitting here?
What?
We've been married for 8 years. Does it occur to you that this is the first time we two, you and I, man and wife, have ever had a serious talk together?
Serious? What do you mean by serious?
In 8 whole years. No, longer. Ever since we first met. We have never exchanged a serious word on a serious subject.
Did you expect me to drag you into all my worries that you couldn't possibly have helped me with?
I'm not talking about worries. I'm simply saying that we have never sat down seriously to try to get to the bottom of anything.
But, my dear Nora, what on earth has that got to do with you?
That's just the point. You have never understood me. A great wrong has been done to me, Torvald. First by Papa and then by you.
What, but we two have loved you more than anyone else in the world.
You have never loved me. You just thought it was fun to be in love with me.
Nora, what kind of a way is this to talk?
Good, thank you, very nice. Now, so it's a really nice little scene, but nothing had been written like that in those days, not on the stage. Now, the powerful thing to me, the brilliance of it is that you have to, what's the best way of putting it? If you retrofit 2020 attitudes to this scene, it doesn't work, because the point there is that she hasn't had access to feminism. She hasn't had access to feminist theory, all these different things. And up until now, the marriage has worked for them both. One of the ways that Ibsen sets it all up is that she benefits from the money. She's always been quite spoiled. There's a whole class thing that goes on with it, where Christina Lind, who's her friend, has had to make her way in the world. And she's never had to work. So the point here is that she's as astonished as he is at this transformation, but she's not It's a woman doing it on her own, if you know what I mean, not with a background that's supporting her. Are you there, Alice? You're still there. So the point, and also underneath it all, there is, in the, Michael Mayer used to say that the whole point about the relationship is it's the sort, if it did happen, on the outside, everybody would see what would be a very loving, seemed to be a very happy, cozy, domestic, loving relationship. That it was the last couple that you'd expect this to happen, and that's the point. Is she's realizing in this scene how she's also colluded in the fact that the marriage is one that's not true, that they haven't told the truth to each other, because they both indulge in baby talk and all those different things, and etc. So she's realizing herself that they both have been in this kind of trap. And the thing for him is, and this is an interesting thing. Well, we'll go on to the next bit. So if you can carry on, Alice and Adam.
There may be a little truth in what you say, though you exaggerate and romanticize. But from now on, it'll be different. Playtime is over. Now the time has come for education.
Whose education? Mine or the children's?
Both yours and the children's, my dearest Nora.
Oh, Torvald, you're not the man to educate me into being the right wife for you.
How can you say that?
And what about me? Am I fit to educate the children?
Nora!
Didn't you say yourself a few minutes ago that you dare not leave them in my charge?
In a moment of excitement, surely you don't think I meant it seriously?
Yes, you were perfectly right. I'm not fitted to educate them. There's something else I must do first. I must educate myself. And you can't help me with that. It's something I must do by myself. That's why I'm leaving you.
What did you say?
I must stand on my own feet if I'm to find out the truth about myself and about life. So I can't go on living here with you any longer.
Nora! Nora!
I'm leaving you now, at once. Christine will put me up for tonight.
You're out of your mind. You can't do this. I forbid you.
It's no use you're trying to forbid me anymore. I shall take with me nothing but what is mine. I don't want anything from you, now or ever.
What kind of madness is this?
Tomorrow I shall go home. I mean, to where I was born. It'll be easiest for me to find some kind of a job there.
But you're blind. You've no experience of the world.
I must try to get some, Torvald.
But to leave your home, your husband, your children? Have you ever thought about what people will say?
I can't help that. I only know that I must do this.
But this is monstrous. Can you neglect your most sacred duties?
What do you call my most sacred duties?
Do I have to tell you? Your duties towards your husband and your children.
I have another duty which is equally sacred.
You have not. What on earth could that be?
My duty towards myself.
First and foremost, you are a wife and a mother.
I don't believe that any longer. I believe that I am first and foremost a human being, like you. Or anyway, that I must try to become one. I know most people think as you do, Torvald, and I know there's something of the sort to be found in books. But I am no longer prepared to accept what people say and what's written in books. I must think things out for myself and try to find my own answer.
Do you need to ask where your duty lies in your own home? Haven't you an infallible guide in such matters? Your religion.
Oh, Torvald, I don't really know what religion means.
What are you saying?
I only know what Pastor Hansen told me when I went to confirmation. He explained that religion meant this and that. When I get away from all this and can think things out on my own, that's one of the questions I want to look into. I want to find out whether what Pastor Hansen said was right, or anyway, whether it was right for me.
But it's unheard of for someone so young to behave like this. If religion cannot guide you, let me at least appeal to your conscience. I presume you have some moral feelings left, or perhaps you haven't. Well, answer me.
Oh, Torvald, That isn't an easy question to answer. I simply don't know. I don't know where I am in these matters. I only know that these things mean something quite different to me from what they do to you. I've learned now that certain laws are different from what I'd imagined them to be. But I can't accept that such laws can be right. Has a woman really not the right to spare her dying father pain or save her husband's life? I can't believe that.
You're talking like a child. You don't understand how society works.
No, I don't. But now I intend to learn. I must try to satisfy myself, which is right. Society or I.
Nora, you're ill. You're feverish. I almost believe you're out of your mind.
I've never felt so sane and sure in my life.
You feel sure that it is your right to leave your husband and your children?
Yes, I do.
Then there is only one plausible explanation.
What?
That you don't love me anymore.
No, that's exactly it.
Nora, how can you say this to me?
Torvald, it hurts me terribly to have to say it, because you've always been so kind to me. But I can't help it. I don't love you any longer.
And you feel quite sure about this too?
Yes, absolutely sure. That's why I can't go on living here any longer.
Can you explain why I have lost your love?
Yes, I can. It happened this evening, when the miracle failed to happen. It meant I realised you weren't the man I thought you to be.
Explain more clearly. I don't understand you.
I've waited so patiently for 8 whole years. Well, good heavens, I'm not such a fool as to suppose that miracles occur every day. Then this dreadful thing happened to me, and then I knew. Now the miracle will take place. When Krogstad's letter was lying out there, it never occurred to me for a moment that you would let that man trample over you. I knew that you would say to him, "Publish the facts to the world." And when he had done this...
Yes, what then? When I'd exposed my wife's name to shame and scandal?
Then I was certain that you would step forward and take all the blame on yourself and say, "I am the one who is guilty."
Oh, Nora!
You're thinking I wouldn't have accepted such a sacrifice from you. No, of course I wouldn't. But what would my word have counted for against yours? That was the miracle I was hoping for and dreading. And it was to prevent it happening that I wanted to end my life.
Nora, I would work gladly for you night and day and endure sorrow and hardship for your sake, but no man can be expected to sacrifice his honour, even for the person he loves.
Millions of women have done it.
Brilliant. Very good. Thank you very much. Okay. So you can sit. Thank you. Beautifully read.
Run away. Sorry about that.
That's all right. My hazard with this. You can see how powerful that is. And the moment in that which absolutely broke my heart was the moment where she tells him that she doesn't love him anymore. And that's where the twist of it, that's where actually he starts to crumple and he starts to give in. And to me, the beauty of it is that the beauty of it is that it's a drama for both of them, and there's a moment later in the scene where he actually says to her, "I have the strength to change. I have the strength to change," and she doesn't believe him, and she still goes. And the very last thing he says is "miracle of miracles." So she actually says, "I would only return for that to work between us is for us to be true marriage." And that's when he says he's willing to try and change. And that to me is what makes it so moving. If he's a monster, then it's easy for her to go. It's much, much harder if she recognises there's a human being there, that there's kindness there, then it makes it an all the more powerful departure for her in her own quest to find out who she really is. And also, that's the other. I've read a couple of interesting books recently, The Wide Sargasso Sea and Tenant of Wildfell Hall. By 19th century standards, if a woman did what Nora does, the men usually chased after them, got the police or gangs, and they forcibly brought them back. But what's interesting about the play is he writes it so that Torvald lets her go. He doesn't stop her, and he listens to her. And to me, that's actually what's remarkable about that last section. It doesn't mean he's the goody or he's redeemed, but it means that what Ibsen is doing is creating a far more complex vision of how men and women behave with each other than ever before. Nothing about his pain invalidates the quest that she's on and the journey that she's on. But this is what I think is so subtle about Ibsen, is he never ever lets you have a black and white simple solution to things. So that play made him notoriously massively successful all the way across Europe, and suddenly he found a new voice. And the play he wrote after it was The Ghost, which is my favourite Ibsen play. It's the only naturalistic play by him I've done, and did it with students. He said about Ghosts that after creating Nora, he had to create Mrs. Alving. And Mrs. Alving is Nora if she hadn't left. So the power of the Alving story and is that just a general background. Mrs. Alving is in her 40s, 50s, whatever, and she was married. She's from a regional town in Norway on the coast, and she was married to Captain Alving. And Captain Alving was this charismatic, handsome, everybody loved him man. Everyone thought he was marvelous, and he was the kind of pillar of the community. And he died a few years ago. They had a child. And he was also wealthy, and they had a child called Oswald. And for some reason that's not clear until you find out later, while the Alvings were married, Mrs. Alving sent him away to learn how to be a painter in Paris. So, and at the beginning of the play, Mrs. Alving has, Captain Alving is dead, and she's used the money that she's inherited from him to build an orphanage. And Oswald has returned home to their family house. So for the first time in years, Mrs. Alving has got her son back. And she feels that finally she's got her son back, she can have a connection with him. And Oswald is sick, he's recuperating from something, but we don't know what it is. Now the third major character in the play is Pastor Manders. And Pastor Manders is, there's a lineage with him and Brand, in that Manders is a powerful figure in the community. But he hasn't been in the house for years. But Mrs. Alving is one of the big landowners. They are two quite important public figures. And at the beginning of the play, Mrs. Alving has invited Manders to come up because he's overseeing the orphanage. And he's come up to look after the business side of it. And it quite rapidly becomes clear that there's a history between them. And what emerges in the play, and this is what I've never seen done in the play, is that they nearly had an affair. That when they were younger, Mrs. Alving was in love with Pastor Manders. She became very caught up with he was a handsome, young, charismatic preacher. And she was still married to Captain Alving. And at a key moment in the past, she tried to leave Alving and join Pastor Manders, and Manders sent her back. Mm. And from then onwards, she was stuck in this marriage. Now, in the play, one of the things you find out very early on is that he refuses to stay in the house with her. She says, can I not? When he turns up with his bags, he's only got a little bag. And she says, are you not going to stay? And he said, no, I'll stay in her. And she says, can I still not get you to stay inside my house? And the reason, this is one of those great moments in Ibsen where you can miss what that means. And what he's too scared to spend the night in the house because she thinks she'll jump him. That is literally what it is. The danger of the pastor being in the house, that she's still attracted to him. Now, the brilliance of the play is that gradually you discover that actually Captain Alving was not what he seemed. And Manders himself still is angry with Mrs. Alving for, first of all, abandoning her husband, trying to run away from the responsibility of her marriage and go to him. And secondly, for expelling Oswald. And in the scene that we're about to see, they've never ever talked about what happened. And Pastor Manders has lectured her in this scene about her irresponsibility. He's told her, you've always had a rebellious spirit, you've always run away. The other big thing about Mrs. Alving is she's lost her faith, and she's now reading free-thinking books. And he's deeply concerned that she's becoming an atheist. And in those days, in Norway, the church was the pillar, the Lutheran church was the pillar of the society. It was how morality was enforced. And there was a real fear that it would all decay if atheism took over. That's where, and there was fear that the youth were becoming atheistical and free thinking. So he lectures her, and then she responds and she tells him the truth about her marriage. Off you go, please.
Okay. You have had your say, Pastor, and tomorrow you will speak publicly at my husband's ceremony. I shall not speak tomorrow, but now I shall say a few words to you, as you have said a few words to me.
Robin, you're muted.
Of course, you wish
Sorry.
to excuse your conduct.
No, I simply want to tell you what happened.
Oh,
Everything you have just said about me and my husband and our life together after you, as you put it, had led me back on the path of duty. All that is something of which you have no knowledge from your own observations. From that moment, who used to visit us every day, never once set foot in our house.
you and your husband moved from town shortly afterwards.
Yes, and you never came out here to see us while my husband was alive. It was only the business connected with the orphanage that compelled you to visit me.
Helen, if this is intended as a reproach, I must beg you to consider the duty
to your position. Yes. And then I was a wife who had run away from her husband. One can never be too careful with such unprincipled women.
My dear Mrs. Alving, you exaggerate grotesquely.
Yes, well, let us forget it. What I wanted to say was that when you judge my conduct as a wife, you are content to base your judgment on common opinion.
Yes, well, what of it?
But now, Manders, now I shall tell you the truth. I have sworn to myself that one day you should know it. Only you.
And what is the truth?
The truth is that my husband died just as dissolute as he had always lived.
What did you say?
Just as dissolute, at any rate in his desires after 19 years of marriage, as he was before you wedded us.
You call these youthful escapades, these irregularities, excesses, if you like, evidence of a dissolute life.
That is the expression our doctor used.
I don't understand you.
It doesn't matter.
I cannot believe my ears. You mean your whole married life, all those years you shared with your husband, were nothing but a facade?
Yes. And now you know.
But this, I cannot accept. I don't understand. I can't credit it. But how on earth is it possible? How could such a thing be kept secret?
Oh, I had to fight day after day to keep it secret. After Oswald was born, I thought things became a little better with Alving, but it didn't last long. And now I had to fight a double battle, fight with all my strength to prevent anyone knowing what kind of man my child's father was. Oh, and you know what a winning personality Alvin had. No one could believe anything but good of him. He was one of those people whose reputations remain untarnished by the way they live. But then, Manders, you must know this too. Then came the most loathsome thing of all.
More loathsome than this?
I put up with him, although I knew well what went on secretly outside the house. But when he offended within these four walls...
What are you saying, here?
Yes, here, in our own home. In there, was in the dining room. I first found out about it. I had something to do in there and the door was standing ajar. Then I heard our maid come in from the garden to water the flowers in there.
Yes.
Well, a few minutes later, I heard Alving enter the room. He said something to her, and then I heard... I still don't know whether to laugh or cry. I heard my own servant whisper, "Stop it, Mr. Alving. Let me go."
What an unseemly frivolity, but it was nothing more than a frivolity, Mrs. Alving, believe me.
I soon found out what to believe. My husband had his way with the girl, and that relationship had consequences, Pastor Manders.
And all this took place in this house, in this house.
I had endured much in this house. To keep him at home in the evenings and at night, I had to make myself his companion in his secret dissipations up in his room. There I had to sit alone with him, had to clink my glass with his and drink with him, listen to his obscene and senseless drivelling. Had to fight him with my fists to haul him into bed.
I don't know how you managed to endure it.
Well, I had to, for my little son's sake. But when the final humiliation came, when my own servant, and I swore to myself, this must stop. And so I took over the reins of the house, both as regards him and everything else. For now, you see, I had a weapon against him. He dared not murmur. It was then I sent Oswald away. He was nearly 7 and was beginning to notice things and ask questions the way children do. I couldn't bear that, Manders. I thought the child could not help but be poisoned merely by breathing in this tainted home. That was why I sent him away. And so now you know why he was never allowed to set foot in this home while his father was alive. No one knows what it cost me.
You have indeed been sorely tried.
I could never have borne it if I had not had my work. Yes, I think I can say that I have worked. All the additions to the estate, all the improvements, all the useful innovations for which Alving was praised. Do you imagine he had the energy to initiate any of them? He spent the whole day lying on the sofa reading old court circulars. No, let me tell you this too. I drove him forward when he was in happier moods, and I had to bear the whole burden when he started again on his dissipations or collapsed in snivelling helplessness.
And it is to this man that you raise a memorial.
There, you see the power of a guilty conscience.
Good, thank you very much. Very good, brilliant scene. Okay, it's an amazing scene, beautifully read. Now, when this play came out, it exploded. It set off an absolute shitstorm, forgive me for using the terms, an absolute storm of horror, because you can see him absolutely ripping up the lid over marriage. And instead, even The Doll's House is one thing, this went even further. This deals with corrupt sexuality, and if you'll notice all the way through it, she never spells out when she says that comment about that, at least what the doctor said. What do you think that means? What's she referring? Those of you who know the trick of the play, don't give it away. But what does she mean by that? And he says, "I don't understand you." And then she said, "Well, forget about it." Nobody knows. Okay, basically what she's saying is that Well, she's saying, okay, so the thing that hangs over the play is the fact that Oswald, her son, the mystery disease that he's got is actually syphilis. And he's caught the syphilis from from her, not through anything, she's not gone to prostitutes. It's just that syphilis can be transmitted is a sexually transmitted disease. And she got it from her husband, and he had it before he married her. And so when Oswald is born, he's inherited syphilis. And the shock in the play, which comes in the second act, is that Oswald has to tell her that's what he's got wrong with him. That's what's really ill. And she realizes that all her efforts to protect him from her husband have failed, that fundamentally the corruption of her husband has got him. And that's where it becomes like a Greek tragedy. And actually the play is a rewrite of the Oresteia, with Oswald as Orestes, her as a kind of Clytemnestra, Manders as Aegisthus, Alving as an Agamemnon. But it's all rebooted. And that's the genius of the play, is that the fates, the furies in the play, the way, you know, in the Oresteia, in which the curse of the family goes down through generations, is expressed and said through this disease, syphilis. Now, what's brilliant about the play, and this is why I wanted to bring it up, is that it's classic Ibsen, in that the characters can't, when it comes to those issues, call the spade a spade. So when she makes that line about dissolution, that's what the doctor said, they both know what they're referring to, even though Amanda says, I don't know what you mean, because it would be wrong for a pastor to know about syphilis. They actually know that the doctor has said that's what he's got. He's died of when she says he died as dissolute as he lived, he was riddled with illness and disease, and she kept all this secret. So it's darker play in that respect. House. But what I love about it is all this unspoken stuff. And the next scene I want to look at briefly is the scene between Manders and her, where they come very, very close to talking about what happened to them. Now, she's mentioned earlier, if you saw it, where she says to him, of course, I was a woman who'd left her husband, and you can't be safe with those, can you? Now, they both know what they're referring to there, but he doesn't pick up on it, because to talk about it would open something up that they can't deal with. And the interesting thing about Manders is he's a priest, a Lutheran priest, but he's not married. So he's been a bachelor all his life. He's given himself to his faith and his religion, and his like Bran, he's given everything to it. And he's probably never had sex. So this is a man who has suppressed that part of him. But he's still, the genius of the play is there's still chemistry between them. He's still, and this is the scene. So Felicity and Robin, take this scene, take it away. This is after the other revelation that's just come through, is that Regina, who's the maid, is the daughter of Alving, and the maid that she mentioned. She's taken in Oswald's half-sister. And Manders, by this time, has been absolutely shaken by all these revelations. And here we go. So this scene, please.
Aha. So there we have the fruits of your reading. Fine fruits indeed. Oh, these loathsome, rebellious, free-thinking books.
You are wrong, my dear pastor. It was you yourself who first spurred me to think, and I thank you and bless you for it.
I?
Yes, when you forced me into what you called duty, when you praised as right and proper that my whole spirit rebelled against as something abominable. It was then I began to examine the seams of your learning. I only wanted to pick at a single knot. But when I had worked it loose, the whole fabric fell apart. And I then saw that it was machine-made.
Is this the reward of my life's hardest struggle?
Call it rather your life's most pitiful defeat.
It was my life's greatest victory, Helen. The victory over myself.
It was a crime against us both.
That I besought you, saying, woman, go home to your lawful husband. When you came to me distraught and cried, I am here, take me. That was a crime?
Yes, I think so.
We two do not understand each other.
No, not any longer.
Never. Never even in my most secret moments have I thought of you except as another man's wedded wife.
Well, I wonder.
Helen!
Oh, one forgets so easily what one was like.
I do not. I am the same as I always was.
Well, let's not talk any more about the past. Now you're up to your ears in commissions and committees, and I sit here fighting with ghosts, both in me and around me.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Beautiful scene. It's an amazing scene. Now, what I love about that scene is that they never, ever quite say what they want to say to each other. But it's absolutely obvious the way Pastor Manders talks that he was powerfully attracted to her. To talk about it being a victory over himself, to say that he means that it wouldn't have been a victory over himself unless he was drawn to her. There was clear when they were young that there was this passionate energy between them, but he couldn't embrace it because it was his position. Do you know what I mean? And what's lovely about the way Felicity played it, which is I think is absolutely right, is if at this moment he said, I love you, Mrs. Alving, I love you, Helen. And notice that in the script, sometimes he calls her Helen, and at other times he calls her Mrs. Alving. And there's an intimacy to the line Helen. They were very close. And the tragedy of the scene, to me, it's a brief encounter moment of what might have been. And at the heart of the play is the tragedy of a life that wasn't lived, which has meant that all the lives, she was stuck with this marriage. She didn't do what Nora did, which was to leave. She tried to find other ways of coping with it, and she suffered massively. And if he at that moment said, okay, I love you, she would take him and they would be together. And I think that this again is rather like The Doll's House, is that if you play Pastor Manders as an idiot, you completely lose all that. And I've seen it done where you go, oh, well, he's a priest, so he must be a fool. He's a Christian, he must be a fool. And there's no doubt that throughout the play, Ibsen demolishes a lot of his assumptions. But there's still a man who's more complicated. When I did it, I remember saying, there is an argument to be said that if Mr. Alving did follow the morality that Pastor Manders argued, none of this would have happened. Do you see what I mean? So once again, although Ibsen is attacking the fundamental kind of prejudices of Manders, he still sees him as a substantial human being. So if you play him like a fool, you lose this essential tragedy at the heart of the story. It's a heartbreaking moment, that, and that's why she says it was a crime against both of us. It hurt you because you never lived, and it hurt me because it broke me as well. And it should be a really. And that's the other beautiful thing about it. These two people have known each other for decades, and they're older now. And in a sense, the only other person who will ever understand them is the other one. And I think it's a very moving moment when Manders leaves. He leaves about a third of the way through the last act, and it's never resolved. He goes. He's a very flawed character, but there's still a potency there, which is hugely moving. And there should be a real feeling there of loss. So the tragedy of the play is that you're completely on the side of Mrs. Alving. You're aware of how much she's suffered and the agony she's been through. And just at the beginning of the play, you think, finally, she's through. Alving is dead. She feels that she's paid everything off. Then she learns the bombshell that her son Oswald has syphilis. Now, an interesting thing about the play is the word syphilis is never used. And one of the problems I used to have with the play was it's never spelt out that he's got syphilis. So I was sitting there going, well, you can watch the play and absolutely not know what's going on. But when I was directing it with Mountain View students, one of them pointed out that the term that Oswald uses when he goes to a doctor and says, what's wrong with me? The doctor says, you're worm-eaten, vermalou. Now, that was the term for having syphilis, being worm-eaten. It goes all the way back to the Restoration period and earlier. Worm-eaten, it meant you have syphilis. So in fact, he's spelling out to his mother, that's what I'm dying of. And she's absolutely horrified because she already knows that Alving had it. And she realizes that it has been passed on, but she can't tell him that straight away. Now, what's so powerful about the scenes between Oswald and Mrs. Alving is he's forced to tell his mother he's got a sexually transmitted disease. And the complexity of that, the almost kind of the taboos of that, of having to tell your own mum, I'm afraid this is what I've got. Ibsen writes sensationally well. Now, Oswald's plan is to marry Regina, who's the maid, and because she's full of life and energy, and she will look after him because he's been told he hasn't got very long to live, and that's what he's hoping. But of course, Regina is his half sister, so if they were to get married, it would be incestuous. But Mrs. Alving has never told Regina who she is, and she destroys that relationship because she doesn't feel they should be together because it would be incestuous. And Regina, who was hoping to be lifted up by Oswald socially, storms out and at one point says, "You could have brought me up as a gentlewoman." So in trying to protect Regina, she absolutely fails. And at that point, Oswald and she are left alone, and it's now 5 o'clock in the morning or something, and the orphanage is burnt down. So Oswald is covered in sweat and dust and all this kind of stuff, and all his hopes have gone. Did someone say something?
Sorry, Jake. I just wanted to comment on the scene between the pastor and the wife, and also to say that, you know, surely it makes a difference that the pastor wasn't aware of what a monster the husband was when he rejected her. I mean, had he been aware, obviously he would have been a complete fool and you would have no sympathy for him, etc., etc. But he had no idea.
That's the point. That's the point.
Yeah.
That's what Ibsen does. He never gives you a simple moral landscape. He makes it complex. And also, I think the point there is that quite often Pastor Evangelist is presented as a dry old stick. And that, again, that doesn't make any sense. She's attracted to him. And Ibsen writes a lot of these characters. Rosmer in Rosmer's home, they're men of enormous sensuality, but they've buried it. Michael May always used to say that with those, you need an actor who, women, the idea is it's forbidden fruit. And Michael's phrase was that if they could take the man's clothes off, they would be a tiger in bed. But they're so repressed. But that's also what makes them attractive, that you can't get at them. This is my point with Ibsen, is he completely scrambles the moral landscape. And although he's exposing the corruption of marriage and all these institutions, he can't help having sympathy for all the characters. So in this scene, which is between Oswald and his mother, Oswald reveals what his plan is. And this is they've got to remember that they've not seen each other for years, so they don't really have a relationship. So even though she wants a connection with him, he's in a slightly more complicated place. So Regina is now left, and he now knows the truth about his father.
I think it was wrong, all this.
Oswald, my dear boy, has this news upset you very much?
All this about father, you mean?
Yes, about your poor father. I'm so afraid it may have been too much for you.
What on earth makes you think that? Of course, it came as a great surprise to me, but I can't really feel it makes any difference.
No difference? That your father was so miserably unhappy?
I feel sorry for him, of course, as I would for anyone, but...
Nothing else? For your own father?
Oh, father. I never knew anything about father. I don't remember anything about him, except that once he made me sick.
Well, this is terrible. I'm surely a child ought to love its father, whatever may happen.
Even when a child has nothing to thank its father for, has never known him. Do you really cling to that old superstition? You, who are otherwise so enlightened.
Do you really think it's only a superstition?
Yes, Mother. Surely you realise that. It's one of those truisms people hand down to their children.
Oh, ghosts.
Yes. That's not a bad word for them. Ghosts.
Oswald, then you don't love me either.
At least I know you.
Well, know me, yes, but is that all?
And of course, I know how fond you are of me, and for that I must be grateful to you. And you can do so much for me now that I'm ill.
Yes, Oswald, I can, can't I? I could almost bless your sickness for bringing you home to me. I realise it now. You aren't mine. I must win you.
Yes. These are just empty phrases. You must remember I'm sick, Mother. I can't be expected to think about others. I've enough worrying about myself.
I shall be patient and undemanding.
And cheerful, mother.
Yes, my dear boy, I know. Have I freed you from all your anxiety and self-reproach now?
Yes, you have. But who will take away the fear?
The fear?
Regina would have done it for the asking.
Well, I don't understand you. What's all this about fear and Regina?
Is it very late, mother?
It's early morning. The dawn's beginning to show up on the mountains. It's going to be a fine day, Oswald. In a little while, you'll be able to see the sun.
I look forward to that. Oh, there's still so much for me to look forward to and to live for.
Of course there is.
Even if I can't work, there is...
You'll soon be able to work again, my dear boy. You haven't all these gnawing and oppressing thoughts to brood over any longer now.
No, it was a good thing you managed to rid me of all those ideas. Once I've got over this one thing. Let's sit down and talk, mother.
Oh, yes, let's.
And while we talk, the sun will rise and then you'll know. And then I won't have this fear any longer.
What will I know?
Mother, didn't you say earlier tonight that there wasn't anything in the world you wouldn't do for me if I asked you?
Certainly I did.
And you'll keep your promise, mother?
Of course I will, my dearest, my only boy. I've nothing else to live for. Only you.
Yes, well, listen then, mother. You're brave and strong. I know that. Now you must sit quite still while I tell you.
What is this dreadful thing you...
You mustn't scream. You hear? Promise me that. We'll sit and talk about it quite calmly. Do you promise me that, mother?
Yes, I promise. Only tell me.
Well then, all that business about being tired and not being able to think about work, that isn't the real illness.
What is the real illness?
The illness which is my inheritance. That's in there.
Oswald, no.
Don't scream. I can't bear it. Yes, mother, it sits in here, watching and waiting, and it may break out any time, any hour.
Oh, how horrible!
Now keep calm. That's the way it is.
It isn't true, Oswald. It's impossible. It can't be true.
I had one attack down there. It soon passed, but when I found out what I had been like, this raging fear began to hunt me, and that's why I came back home to you as quickly as I could.
So that's the fear?
Yes. It's so unspeakably repulsive, you see. Oh, if only it had been an ordinary illness that would have killed me. Because I'm not so frightened of dying, though I'd like to live as long as I can.
Yes, Oswald, you must.
But this is so revolting. To be turned back into a slobbering baby, to have to be fed, to have to be... I can't think about it.
The child has his mother to nurse it.
No, never. That's just what I won't allow. I can't bear to think that I might stay like that for years, growing old and grey, and perhaps you might die and leave me. It might not mean that I'd die at once, the doctor said. He called it a softening of the brain or something. I think that sounds so beautiful. I shall always think of cherry-coloured velvet curtains something delicious to stroke.
Oswald!
And now you've taken Regina from me. If only I had her, she would have saved me, I know.
What do you mean by that, my beloved boy? Is there anything I wouldn't do to save you?
When I had recovered from that attack down there, the doctor told me when it comes again, and it will come again, there's no more hope.
Well, how could he be so heartless as to...
I made him tell me. I told him I had arrangements to make. So I had. Mother, do you see this?
What's that?
Morphine powders.
Oswald, my boy.
I've managed to collect 12 capsules.
Give that box to me, Oswald.
Not yet, Mother.
I can't bear this.
Must bear it. If Regina had been here now, I'd have told her things. I'd have told her how things were with me and asked her to do me this last service. I'm sure she would have helped me.
Never.
When the horror was on me and she saw me lying there like a newborn baby, helpless, lost, beyond all hope.
Regina would never have done it.
She would have. Regina was so splendidly carefree, and she would soon have got bored with looking after an invalid like me.
Well, then thank God that Regina is not here.
Yes. Well. So now you will have to do this last service for me, Mother. Who else?
Your mother.
Exactly.
Who gave you life.
I didn't ask you for life. And what kind of a life have you given me? I don't want it. Take it back.
Good, brilliant. Amazing scene. So you can see from that just how passionate the drama is and how full-blooded. And one of the big things you have to remember about Strindberg's Ibsen's characters is that they are fully human beings. They're sexual human beings and emotional human beings, all those different things. It's not just dry stuff in the head. It's full of passion. And that scene is, when we're saying to Danny, it's a kind of James Dean scene. It's the first rebel without a cause kind of scene. And it's absolutely epic, beautifully read by both of you. So this play made... there's a huge backlash against Ibsen for this play, but he became a huge so-called celeb for the younger generation who identified with Oswald and saw this play as a radical attack on their parents. So the next few plays, Ibsen struggled and battled, and there were people who supported him and people who didn't. Towards the middle of his career, he became massively successful, and he was the preeminent playwright across Europe, influencing everybody. Everybody was reading him, everyone was doing his work, and he was a celebrity. And he, in the middle of his play called Lady from the Sea, which is the big choice in the play, a woman who has to choose between her husband and a kind of fantasy of a man that she knew when she was younger, and she chooses the husband for love. And this is the only play that Ibsen wrote which had a happy ending. Now, after that play, we found to a play called Hedda Gabler, which is now one of his most famous plays. And the reason why I'm bringing this one up is for a playwright who people don't think of as being a very sexual playwright, not a passionate playwright. This is one of the most darkly erotic plays that he ever wrote. Now, the scene we're going to look at is the scene between Hedda and Judge Brack. Now, Hedda is a young, well, she's actually not that, by the standards of her day, she's about 27, which by our time is sort of 37 or whatever. And she's the daughter of a general. And she's everybody in the town has always desired her. She's always had admirers, but she's married instead George Tesman, who is this rather bumbly, funny academic. And into her life, there are two men who are involved in her life who are both angling for her. And one of them is Judge Brack. Hedda is a kind of rewrite of Nora. She's pregnant. She doesn't want to be pregnant. And she actually, although she enjoys male attention, she doesn't enjoy sex. She doesn't actually ever want to consummate it. And she feels trapped. She's pregnant. When the child comes, she knows she will be trapped. Her youth will be over. She won't be free. Now, Brack represents, appears to be full of morality ostensibly, but underneath it, he's got every human vice you could possibly imagine. But he wants Hedda to be his mistress. And in this scene, one of the things that Hedda does is she plays with her father's guns. Her father is dead. She's inherited the guns. And in this scene, she's in her house and Judge Brack is in the garden. And she sees him coming through the back door and she shoots at him. And he grabs the gun. And the power of this scene is all the innuendo and the subtlety of the language as the two of them prowl around each other. Off you go.
That's enough of that little game for today. Well, what on earth am I to do?
You haven't had any visitors?
Not one. I suppose the best people are still in the country.
Your husband isn't home yet?
No. The moment he'd finished eating, he ran off to his auntie's. He wasn't expecting you so early.
Ugh, why didn't I think of that? How stupid of me.
Why stupid?
I'd have come a little sooner.
There'd have been no one to receive you. I've been in my room since lunch, dressing.
You haven't a tiny crack in the door through which we might have negotiated?
You forgot to arrange one.
Another stupidity.
Well, we'll have to sit down here and wait. Tesman won't be back for some time.
Sad. Well, I'll be patient.
Well?
Well?
I asked first.
Yes, well, now we can enjoy a nice, cosy little chat, Mrs. Hedda.
It seems ages since we had a talk. I don't count last night or this morning.
You mean adieu?
Yes, that's roughly what I mean.
I've been longing so much for you to come home.
So have I.
You? Really, Mrs. Hedda? I thought you were having such a wonderful honeymoon.
Oh, yes. Wonderful.
But your husband wrote such ecstatic letters.
He? Oh, yes. He thinks life has nothing better to offer than rooting around in libraries and copying old pieces of parchment, or whatever it is he does.
Well, that is his life. Most of it, anyway.
Yes, I know. Well, it's all right for him. But for me, oh no, my dear Judge, I've been bored to death.
You mean that? Seriously?
Yes. Can you imagine? 6 whole months without ever meeting a single person who was one of us, and to whom I could talk about the kind of things we talk about.
Yes, I can understand. I'd miss that too.
That wasn't the worst, though.
What was?
Having to spend every minute of one's life with the same person.
Yes, what a thought. Morning, noon, and...
As I said, every minute of one's life.
I stand corrected. But dear Tesman is such a clever fellow. I should have thought one ought to be able
Tesman
to...
is only interested in one thing, my dear Judge. His special subject.
True.
And people who are only interested in one thing don't make the most amusing company. Not for long, anyway.
Not even when they happen to be the person one loves?
Don't use that sickly, stupid word.
Mrs. Hedda!
You just try it, Judge. Listening to the history of civilization, morning, noon, and...
Every minute of one's life.
All right. Oh, and those domestic industries of Brabant in the Middle Ages. That really is beyond the limit.
But tell me, if you feel like this. Why on earth did you,
Why on earth did I marry George Tesman?
if you like to put it that way?
Do you think it's so very strange?
Yes. And no, Mrs. Hedder.
I've danced myself tired, Judge. I felt my time was up. No, I mustn't say that, or even think it.
You've no rational cause to think it?
Cause. After all, George Tesman, well, I mean, he's a very respectable man.
Very respectable, sound as a rock, no denying that.
And there's nothing exactly ridiculous about him, is there?
Ridiculous? No, I wouldn't say that.
He's very clever at collecting material and all that, isn't he? I mean, he may go quite far in time.
I thought you believed, like everyone else, that he would become a very prominent man.
Yes, I did. And when he came and begged me on his bended knee to be allowed love and to cherish me, I didn't see why I shouldn't let him.
No, well, if one looks at it like that.
It was more than my other admirers were prepared to do, Judge dear.
I can't answer for the others. As far as I myself am concerned, you know, I've always had a considerable respect for the institution of marriage as an institution.
Oh, I've never entertained any hopes of you.
All I want is to have a circle of friends whom I can trust, whom I can help with advice or by any other means, and into whose houses I may come and go as a trusted friend.
Of the husband?
Preferably, to be frank, of the wife. And of the husband too, of course. Yes, you know, this kind of triangle is a delightful arrangement for all parties concerned.
Yes. I often longed for a third person while I was away. Oh, those hours we spent alone in railway compartments.
Fortunately, your honeymoon is now over.
There's a long, long way still to go. I've only reached a stop on the line.
Why not jump out and stretch your legs a little, Mrs. Hedder?
I'm not the jumping sort.
Aren't you?
No. There's always someone around who...
Who looks at one's legs?
Yes, exactly.
Well, but surely.
I don't like it. I'd rather stay where I am, sitting in the compartment. Adieu.
But suppose a third person were to step into the compartment.
That would be different.
A trusted friend. Someone who understood.
And was lively and amusing.
And interested in more subjects than one.
Yes, that'd be a relief.
Nope. The triangle is completed.
And the train goes on.
Good, thank you very much. Great scene. Okay, so if you can see, that's a scene which is laden with sexuality. You can see that what he's basically proposing to her is an affair, and she seems to be agreeing to it. And this again, she talks about the fact that most of her admirers just wanted to sleep with her. They didn't want to actually have a relationship with her. So she's aware that this is the two of them. There's an interesting thing about Ibsen, is I discovered that he was a Pisces. Now, not everyone's into astrology, but the interesting thing about the Pisces is it's the two fish pulling in two directions. It's two fish, one material, one spiritual, one sexual, one, all those different things. And all his characters are often swimming, caught between their decisions. Where do they want to jump? Where do they want to? What do they really want? And that whole scene, if you get it right, should be laden with the two of them knowing exactly what the other one is saying, probing each other. That's, again, you need to understand what's going on underneath it to really get it. Now, the other man in the play is Lovborg, who years and years and years ago was a rival to Tesman as an academic. Now, Lovborg used to be an alcoholic, but he's also an academic genius. He's a kind of visionary, again, another brand figure, but he was disgraced when he was younger because of his alcoholism and also he's probably a sex addict. So he was beyond the pale, but he's reformed himself. He's now gone clean and he's got into a relationship with a woman called Thea Elstead, and he's writing new books. Now, in the first time that he and Hedda meet each other, you realise that they have a past. And I'm including this scene because once again, it's about sexuality and it's also about the meaning behind the words. Everybody's in the party. Tesman is in the next room. Brack is also there. Everybody's listening. Everyone's interested that Lovborg's turned up because they know he's dangerous. Okay, let's take the scene. Danny, you need to unmute. Everyone needs to unmute. Yeah. Adam, this is you as Tesman. Go with
I've some photographs I'd like to show you, if you'd care to see them. Tesman and I visited Tyrol on our way home. You see these mountains, Mr. Lovborg? That's the Ortler Group. Tesman has written the name underneath. You see, the Ortler Group near Moran.
Hedda Gabler.
Shh.
Hedda Gabler.
Yes. That used to be my name when we first knew each other.
And from now on, for the rest of my life, I must teach myself never to say Hedda Gabler.
Yes, you must. You'd better start getting into practice. The sooner the better.
Hedda Gabler married to George Tesman.
Yes. Well, that's life.
Hedda, how could you throw yourself away like that?
Stop it.
What do you mean?
And this, Mr. Lovborg. Oh, I'm so sorry. I've just poured water over my laptop. Give me 2 seconds.
the dramatic
Got so carried away with the passion. Ah! Sorry, give me 2 seconds.
Okay, don't worry. That's not actually in the script, everybody. But can I just do while Alice is sorting that out? The point about Hedda is that she is someone who is two things. One is she's afraid of scandal. The second thing is, although, as I said before, although she enjoys power over men, she doesn't want the men to have power over her, and they get power over her if they have sex with her. And that's where, all the way through the play, one of the reasons why she's married Tesman is that he doesn't seem to be that sexual. And that's also when you noticed earlier when she's talking about morning, day and night, she doesn't want to say night because she has already had the experience of having sex with Tesman and it's not made her happy. Now, the genius of Ibsen is that it's all hinted at. All of this is hinterland stuff. And you can miss it. If you haven't understood all this stuff, if you haven't done the work, you don't know what they're talking about. So all of this stuff just seems to be a very airy-fairy work. But I think what really interests me, one of the interesting things about Ibsen is he apparently, when he was young, he got one of his maids pregnant. And he did have a legitimate child, like Peer does, like Mr. Alving did. But he rejected that child when the child came to find him later. But after he'd had his son with his wife, it's widely thought they never had sex again. He was deeply inhibited sexually. So that, and a lot of characters like that. But what's so interesting is for a man who was apparently deeply inhibited sexually, he seemed to have a lot of insight into how people were driven by their sexuality. So can we pick it up from where we were?
Sorry about that.
Right.
And this, Mr. Lovborg, is the view from the Ampezzo Valley. Look at these mountains. What did you say these curious mountains were called, dear?
Let me have a look. Oh, those are the Dolomites.
Of course. Those are the Dolomites, Mr. Lovborg.
Hedda, I just wanted to ask you, can't we bring some punch in here? A glass for you, anyway. What?
Thank you. Yes. And a biscuit or two, perhaps.
You wouldn't like a cigarette?
No.
Right.
Answer me, Hedda. How could you do it?
If you go on calling me Hedda, I won't talk to you anymore.
Mayn't I even when we're alone?
No. You can think it, but you mustn't say it.
Oh, I see. Because you love George Tessman.
Love? Don't be funny.
You don't love him?
I don't intend to be unfaithful to him. That's not what I want.
Hedda, just tell me one thing.
Shh.
Here we are. Here come the refreshments.
Why didn't you ask the servant to bring it in?
I like waiting on you, Hedda.
But you filled both glasses. Mr. Loveborg doesn't want to drink.
Yes, but Mrs. Elfstead will be here soon.
Oh yes, that's true. Mrs. Elfstead.
Had you forgotten her? What?
We're so absorbed with these photographs. You remember this little village?
Oh, that one down by the Brenner Pass. We spent a night there.
Yes, and met all those amusing people.
Oh, yes, it was, wasn't there, wasn't it? By Jove, if only we could have had you with us, Ailette. Oh, well.
Tell me one thing, Hedda.
Yes.
Didn't you love me either? Not just a little?
Well, now, I wonder. No, I think we were just good friends. You certainly poured your heart out to me.
You begged me to.
Looking back on it, there was something beautiful and fascinating and brave about the way we told each other everything. That secret friendship no one else knew about.
Yes, Hedda, yes. Do you remember how we used to come up to your father's house in the afternoon and the General sat by the window and read his newspapers with his back towards us?
And we sat on the sofa in the corner.
Always reading the same illustrated magazine.
We hadn't any photograph album.
Yes, Hedda. I regarded you as a kind of confessor. Told you things about myself which no one else knew about. Then, those days and nights of drinking and... Oh, Hedda, what power did you have to make me confess such things?
Power? You think I had some power over you?
Yes. I don't know how else to explain it. And all those oblique questions you asked me.
You knew what they meant.
But that you could sit there and ask me such questions so unashamedly.
I thought you said they were oblique.
Yes, but you asked me them so unashamedly that you could question me about that kind of thing.
You answered willingly enough.
Yes. That's what I can't understand, looking back on it. But tell me, Hedda, what you felt for me wasn't that love? When you asked me those questions and made me confess my sins to you, wasn't it because you wanted to wash me clean?
No, not exactly.
Why did you do it then?
Do you find it so incredible that a young girl, given the chance in secret, should want to be allowed a glimpse into a forbidden world of whose existence she is supposed to be ignorant?
So that was it.
One reason, I think.
You didn't love me then. You just wanted knowledge. But if that was so, why did you break it off?
That was your fault.
It was you that put an end.
Yes. When I realized that our friendship was threatening to develop into something else. Shame on you, Eilert Lovborg. How did you abuse the trust of your dearest friend?
Why didn't you do it? Why didn't you shoot me dead, as you threatened to?
I was afraid of the scandal.
Yes, Hedda. You're a coward at heart.
A dreadful coward. Luckily for you. Well, now you've found consolation with the Elsteds.
I know what Taya's been telling you.
I dare say you told her about us?
Not a word. She's too silly to understand that kind of thing.
Silly?
She's silly about that kind of thing.
And I'm a coward. But let me tell you something. Something you don't know.
Yes?
My failure to shoot you wasn't my worst act of cowardice that evening.
Hedda Gabler. Now I see what was behind those questions. Yes, it wasn't knowledge you wanted, it was life.
Take care. Don't you delude yourself.
Good, brilliant scene. Great stuff. Okay. So you can see underneath, again, this supposedly passionless intellectual playwright. The characters are seething with passions and energies and sexuality and love, and you can also see the code in there when he says, "Why did you break it off?" and she says, "Because you wanted our friendship to become something else." If you don't understand what she's referring to, he wanted to sleep with her. He wanted to make this relationship they had where he was confessing he was a man who was going to brothels and having affairs and drinking, and she was listening to him as a young woman, and it gave her a thrill. But as soon as he wanted to go one step further with her, she nearly shot him. And this is the key moment of the gun. All the way through, the gun is the potent image that whenever she's threatened, she uses the gun to defend herself. And that's it's a fascinating thing. But at the end of the scene, if you listen, she says, I was not, he says, "You're a coward at heart." And I'll get onto why he says that in a sec. And she says, what is it she says? Shooting you was not the only act of cowardice I made that night. I can't remember what it is, the line is. She means, I wish I had slept with you. I wish I'd done that.
Not the worst act of cowardice.
Sorry? Well,
not shooting was not the worst act of, my worst act of cowardice.
That's right. So her worst act of cowardice was that she didn't accept his advances. Do you see what I mean? That she didn't go with him. So you're back again to past the manners of Mrs. Alving and the life not lived. Now, what's complicated is that you're not clear whether is this anxiety she has about sexuality. So she loves having the power over the man, but she doesn't want it to be consummated. Now, where does this come from? What's interesting is that what happened to Ibsen was that just before he wrote this play, he was at the height of his fame and his power. He was celebrated everywhere. He'd been through his years of exile, and he'd written his happiest play, Lady from the Sea, which is the only play he wrote with a kind of happy ending. And they were on holiday in a place called, his wife and he were on holiday in a place called Gostensass in Germany. And he met a young woman called Emilia Bardach, who was 18. Now, he didn't sleep with her, but they engaged on this holiday in front of his wife in this very, very intense relationship, which was never consummated. And it turns out when people have got hold of his letters that he promised her that he would leave his wife and take her all around the world. And she believed that he'd fallen in love with her and this was what was going to happen. But at the last minute, he pulled out and rejected her. And she was left completely shattered by it. And he came away and wrote Hedda Gabler. And he told his friends that that Hedda was based on this woman, young woman who he believed was trying to ensnare him. But Michael Mayer always said that it was the other way around. And in fact, Hedda was him. That in fact, when he actually had the moment where he could have run off with this girl, left his wife, with whom the relationship was quite stale, and suddenly lived this passionate life that he would love to have done, he didn't have the guts. He was too frightened and he pulled back. And that's where this suggestion that Hedda is a coward, when it comes to actually fulfilling what she could do, she can't do it. She won't do it. It also suggested, if you listen to Brack's conversation with her, the inference is that she has the same relationship with Brack when she talks about the things that we talk about, that Brack himself talks in this adult sexual way, but again, it's not consummated. So there's this strange voyeuristic thing going on between them. And the root of it is Ibsen's own inability to jump. Do you know what I mean? When she says you're afraid of the scandal, I think someone says that in the play, is that Ibsen himself felt he couldn't give himself to his passionate self. And this again is the master drama of the play. Now the play continues. Now all the way through this, Brack is watching what's going on. Now Thea is an old school friend of Hedda's, and she's the opposite to Hedda. She's married, but she's now caught up in a kind of unconsummated love affair with Eilert. And he's helped her. She's the one who's reformed him, and she's helped him write this book of philosophy. Now, at the end of the second act, Tesman and Brack go off to a party, and Eilert decides to read the book to them. And then the next night, it turns out that everything went a bit wrong, and Lovborg got drunk and lost the manuscript, and Tesman has picked it up. And at this point, and he gives it to Hedda to look after, and Hedda hides it. And at a certain point in the night, distraught, slightly hungover, Eilert realizes that he's done this terrible thing of losing the manuscript, because he and Thea have actually put all their life into it, and it's all about his comeback. And this is the scene where Hedda, the three of them, have their confrontation. It's late at night now. We're going all the way through the scene. I don't know if you got them. Did you get the second message, guys? We're going to go through all the way through the scene. Okay.
I must come in, I tell you. Let me pass.
Well, Mr. Lovborg, this is rather a late hour to be collecting Thea.
And an early hour to call on you. Please forgive me.
How do you know she's still here?
They told me at her lodgings that she's been out all night.
Did you notice anything about their behaviour when they told you?
Notice anything?
Did they sound as if they thought it strange?
Oh, I see what you mean. I'm dragging her down with me. No, as a matter of fact, I didn't notice anything. I suppose Tesman isn't up yet?
No, I don't think so.
When did he get home?
Very late.
Did he tell you anything?
Yes. I gather you had a merry party at Judge Brack's last night.
He didn't tell you anything else?
I don't think so. I was so terribly sleepy.
Oh, Eilert, at last.
Yes, at last. And too late.
What is too late?
Everything. Now. I'm finished, Thea.
Oh, no. No. Don't say that.
You'll say it yourself when you've heard what I
don't want to hear anything.
Perhaps you'd rather speak to her alone. I'd better go.
No, stay.
But I don't want to hear anything, I tell you.
It's not about last night.
Then what?
I want to tell you that from now on, we must stop seeing each other.
Stop seeing each other?
I knew it.
I have no further use for you, Thea.
You can't stand there and say that. No further use for me? Surely I can go on helping you or go on working together, won't we?
I don't intend to do any more work from now on.
Then what use have I for my life?
You must try to live as if you had never known me.
But I can't.
Try to, Thea. Go back home.
Never. I want to be wherever you are. I won't let myself be driven away like this. I want to stay here and be with you when the book comes out.
Ah, yes, the book.
Our book. Thea's and mine. It belongs to both of us.
Oh, yes, I feel that too. And I've got a right to be with you when it comes into the world. I want to see people respect and honour you again. And the joy, I want to share in it with you.
Thea, our book will never come into the world.
Oh.
No, not.
It cannot. Ever.
Eilert, what have you done with the manuscript?
Yes, the manuscript.
Where is it?
Oh, Thea, please don't ask me that.
Yes, I must know. I've got a right to know now.
The manuscript. Yes. I've torn it up.
No! No!
But that's not...
Not true, you think?
Why, yes, of course it is, if you say so. It sounded so incredible.
It's true, nevertheless.
Oh my God! My God! Hedda, he's destroyed his own book.
I have destroyed my life. Why not my life's work, too?
You did this last night?
Yes, Thea, I tore it into 1,000 pieces and scattered them out across the fjord. It's good, clean, salt water. Let it carry them away. Let them drift into the current and the wind, and in a little while they will sink deeper and deeper, as I shall, Thea.
Do you know, Elet, this book, all my life I shall feel as though you've killed a little child.
You're right. It is like killing a child.
But how could you? It was my child too!
Oh, the child.
It's all over then. Well, I'll go now, Hedda.
You're not leaving town?
I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't see anything except darkness.
Aren't you going to escort her home, Mr. Lovborg?
I? Through the street? Do you want me to let people see her with me?
Of course. I don't know what else may have happened last night, but is it so utterly beyond redress?
It isn't just last night. It'll go on happening, I know it. But the curse of it is, I don't want to live that kind of life. I don't want to start all that again. She's broken my courage. I can't spit in the eyes of the world any longer.
That pretty little fool's been trying to shape a man's destiny. But how could you be so heartless towards her?
Don't call me heartless.
To go and destroy the one thing that's made her life worth living. You don't call that heartless?
You want to know the truth, Hedda?
The truth?
Promise me first. Give me your word that you'll never let Thea know about this.
I give you my word.
Good. Well, what I just told her now was a lie.
About the manuscript?
Yes. I didn't tear it up or throw it in the fjord.
You didn't? But where is it then?
I destroyed it all the same. I destroyed it, Hedda.
I don't understand.
Thea said that what I had done was like killing a child.
Yes, that's what she said.
But to kill a child isn't the worst thing a father can do to it.
What could be worse than that?
Hedda, suppose a man came home one morning after a night of debauchery and said to his mother, and said to the mother of his child, "Look here, I've been wandering round all night. I've been to such and such a place and such and such a place. And I had our child with me. I took him to these places. And I've lost him. Just lost him. God knows where he is or whose hands he's fallen into."
I see. But when all's said and done, this was only a book.
Thea's heart and soul were in that book. It was her whole life.
Yes, I understand.
Well, then you must also understand that she and I cannot possibly ever see each other again.
Where will you go?
Nowhere. I just want to put an end to it all as soon as possible.
Eilert Lovborg, listen to me. Do it beautifully.
Beautifully. With a crown of vine leaves in my hair. The way you used to dream of me in the old days.
No. I don't believe in that crown any longer. But do it beautifully all the same. Just this once. Goodbye. You must go now. And don't come back.
Adieu, madam. Give my love to George Tessman.
Wait, I want to give you a souvenir to take with you.
This is the souvenir.
You recognize it? You looked down its barrel once.
You should have used it then.
Here, use it now.
Thank you.
Do it beautifully, Eilert Lovborg. Only promise me that.
Goodbye, Hedda Gabler.
Good, thank you very much. Amazing scene. Yeah, so brilliant scene. What's not clear from that is that she's handing him one of her pistols, the two pistols of her father, and she's telling him to go out and die, basically kill himself. And the big question is, what the fuck is she doing? Pardon my French. And the point here is that for Hedda, because she fundamentally is someone who is very held in. She is fascinated by people who can give themselves to something much bigger than themselves. And it all the way through that scene, she's got the book. So in other words, she could at any point say, don't worry, both of you, I've got the book, here you go. Instead, she watches them both go through their agony, and it absolutely fascinates her. And instead of saving them, she decides she's going to mold them. She loves watching. It's almost like a dramatist watching people. Yes, Alice.
Do you think in sort of today she would have been maybe labelled as a bit of a sociopath? I mean,
well, I'll tell you an interesting thing, Alice. Alice played Miss Julie for me. Strindberg hated Hedda Gabler.
all the nutters.
Strindberg hated Hedda Gabler because he thought that Ibsen had plagiarised Miss Julie, that Hedda was in some way a rewrite of her. There is a sociopathic side to her, but it's also to do with the fact that she is emotionally crippled. There's something in her background, being brought up by a general with privilege, super masculine, and the whole gun thing is about a young, basically rather like Miss Julie, she's been brought up as a man. So she's completely conflicted and confused about her femininity. She's an absolute trophy wife. She's seen as the great prize. All the different men have tried to sleep with her, but she's not fundamentally attracted to any of them. The only one that's really stirred her is Lovborg. But as I say, she has this deep fear of the physical reality of sexuality. So she could be sociopathic, but I think it's more complicated. There's a deep-seated emotional problem in there. Do you know what I mean? A profound fear of life that is actually hurting her and stopping her from being free. She's like Yelena in The Cherry Orchard, who finds everything boring. But Yelena doesn't kill anyone. But Yelena decides she's going to try and have a relationship with Astrov. It's a woman with no function. Do you see what I mean? Taya Elstad has found a purpose, which is writing the book. Nora goes out to find out who she is. But Hedda is someone who she's in rebellion against the world that's around her, but she also is too frightened to leave it. That's what it means by she's a coward. She's not brave enough to do what Taya Elstad has done, which is almost leave her husband and go off with another man. And she's certainly not brave enough to behave the way Lovborg does. So there is a kind of emotional crippledness there, which I think is what the knot in her is. And it's interesting that she's often seen as a feminist icon, and you don't need to turn her into a victim for that to happen. She's a woman who's trapped. She's trapped, but she's also, unlike Nora, she hasn't got the greatness of spirit to release herself. Does that make sense? And I think that what's so powerful there is what you played beautifully there was when you tell him to go and kill himself, it was almost a kind of an orgasmic moment there of that's how they make love. And the whole idea of the vine leaves in her hair, it's interesting, Michael Mayer himself didn't properly identify that. It's Dionysus. Dionysus, who's the wild god of anarchy and sexuality and poetry and genius. And that's what she's trying to make him be. And she wants him to kill himself beautifully because she's not brave enough to kill herself. The idea of killing himself is an act of defiance, of ultimate freedom. Do it beautifully. Make your death into a work of art is what she wants him to do. And at the end of the scene, she burns the book. And she calls it, I'm burning your book, to your child, your child. Now, a really powerful thing about the play is none of the characters in it have got children. Hedda is pregnant and doesn't want to have a child. Tesman Lovborg doesn't have children. Brack doesn't have children. Brack is unmarried. So there's a barrenness to the play. And the only that's why the idea of this whole metaphor of the book as the child becomes so powerful, and destroying the child that's the rip. But I said to Danny and Hannah, the only way to make that scene, one of the problems with the play is how do you make British audiences get excited by a book? If the book is the totemic image, British people aren't that excited by books, and they're not that excited by philosophy books. And Loveborg is set up as a great visionary, like a Nietzsche or a Hegel or a Kierkegaard, you know, a great vision. The book he's going to write is about how he thinks the world is going to be in the future. Now, we don't really have that kind of public intellectual. So the only way you can make that scene work is if the way they talk about the child, the book as a child, is literally how they feel about it, which is why it destroys Thea. And Hedda is fascinated by this. It's voyeurism. Now, the brilliance of the play is that for all three of the first acts, you see all the characters through Hedda's eyes. So Thea seems to be a ninny, Tesman seems to be a dry stick, Loveborg seems to be the charismatic genius, etc., etc. But the brilliance of the last act is Ibsen completely switches that round, because Loveborg doesn't go and kill himself beautifully. He goes back to the brothel where he lost the book, and he has a row with the woman, with the lead prostitute, and in the altercation shoots his genitals, kills himself. He shoots himself in the and that's the interesting thing, is Brack, as the judge, sees the body and has to come and tell Hedda. And the tragedy is that the gun is found on his person, so she's implicated. And at the end of the play, two things happen. Judge Brack closes his trap. He says to her, "Don't worry, no one needs to find out about the gun, but we're going to be friends now, yes? I won't tell anybody. We're going to have our special relationship." And he closes the trap on her. And at the same time, Thea and Tesman get impassioned by the idea of writing Loveborg's book for him. And suddenly, having thought she can control everything, Hedda sees everything go off in other directions. And you suddenly see a different side to all of them. You see a passion in Thea and in Tesman. And you realize that the play is brilliantly written inside her head. And then suddenly at the end, where she thinks she's had control of it all, she loses it. And at the end of the play, she's the only Ibsen character who actually kills herself. She does shoot herself in the head with the pistol. So it's, in many ways, it's an extraordinary, radical, painful play. It's very dark, full of self-loathing. It's a very difficult play to pull off, because it's very hard to make anybody sympathetic. Everybody's quite nasty in it. But there's a huge, as you can see, with all these plays, you can see that what he does is rip off the lid of respectable society, and underneath it show it seething with passions and energies and desires and manipulations in a way that nobody understood in those days. These plays were seen, this play in particular, everyone went, "Hell is this about? We don't understand what's going on." And if you ever want to have a hoot, in the Michael Mayo editions, he rounds up the reviews of the original productions, which are absolutely hysterical, because they all basically say bunch of mad people talking nonsense. The best famous story is after Doll's House, when it was done in England. So the famous quote is somebody coming out going, "How very different from the home life of our own dear Queen." And that's how the English kind of saw Ibsen. He was seen as this weird crank, and he had a massively devoted fan club, which were described as lady men, feminine men and men women. In other words, people of dubious sexuality and too much earnestness loved Ibsen. And the great fan of Ibsen was, of course, George Bernard Shaw, who was the big champion of Ibsen. So, and he was done in England, but England, it took England ages to catch up with Ibsen, because it was all, as you can see, his understanding of us was incredibly modern. These feel like almost 60s plays. That's the other big interesting thing. He was Freud's favorite playwright. Freud was fascinated by, in the plays, the conflict between the top half of the characters' bodies and their sexuality, the id and the superego and all that kind of stuff. That the characters were locked in moralities which were stopping them from being able to release their kind of sensuality. But you can also see in all of these stories how the visionary quality of Brand is there. So in Loveborg, you've got Brand again, the visionary. In Manders, you've got the priest. And you've also got the other side, the Peer Gynt thing, the being pulled towards sexuality and impulse, and not being able to do it. So that the heartbreak for Ibsen was that he never really got over the shame of what went on with Amelia Bardach. He then got involved with another young woman, and the same thing happened. And as he grew older, the last three plays he wrote, The Master Builder, John Gabriel Borkman, and When We Did Awaken, are the most lacerating self-portraits that he makes of himself. They're all sort of King Lear plays. And in each of them, he turns himself into somebody else. So in Solness, it's an architect. master builder in John Gabriel Borkman, and it's a sort of Conrad Black figure. And in Where We Dead Awaken, it's a sculptor. But they're all about the torture of these men, great men, who have sacrificed everything. And then suddenly, towards the end of their life, are undone by the awareness that they've not taken care of their heart. Now, The Master Builder is the only play in the world that's any good about an older man falling in love with a younger woman. And I remember when I once worked in a playwriting group where everybody, it was all people, I was in my 20s, I think it was, and everybody there was over 40, and they were all writing very bad plays, whether they were men or women, about suddenly getting involved with somebody younger. So it was a housewife getting involved with a young teenage boy, or it was a husband getting involved. And it was all like, none of these are very good. I know you all want to do this, but these aren't very good plays. And The Master Builder is the only great play about that. Where it's about Solness, who's this great, obsessive, visionary architect, and this young woman appears at the age of 18 and tells him that when she was 13, she promised him he would marry her. And as he becomes in this kind of obsessive relationship with her, he completely unravels. And you realize that he's riven with guilt and sorrow, but at the same time can't give up on his obsession with architecture. So we'll look at that play, because that's the obvious one. Instead, we're going to look at the end of John Gabriel Borkman, which is the last really complete play he wrote. Now, this ends like Brand on a mountaintop. This is a super wonderfully moving play. Borkman is, as I say, he's like a Robert Maxwell, a Rupert Murdoch figure. He was a great banker, and he had this vision of revitalizing the country. And the only way he could do it was he made this huge fraudulent gamble. And if it had worked, he would have become so wealthy, he would have been able to transform the country. But he failed, was caught for fraud, and was disgraced and sent to prison. And in the play, he's been out of prison for a few years. And there are two women in his life, Ella and Gunhild. And one of them represents the passion of his life, and the other represents, is the one that he married. And it turns out that he married the sister that he wasn't in love with because she had the money, and the one that he was in love with had her life blighted. So this is the very last scene where the two women have had it out with him, and he finds himself on a mountaintop with Ella, who is the one who is the one that he loved, but he betrayed.
Come, Ella, and I shall show you.
What will you show me, John?
See how the country stretches out before us, open and free, far, far away.
We used to sit on that seat and stare into the distance.
It was a country of dreams we gazed into.
The country of our dreams, yes. Now it's covered in snow, and the old tree is dead.
Can you see the smoke from the great steamers out on the fjord?
No.
I can. They come and go. They create a sense of fellowship throughout the world. They bring light and warmth to the hearts of men in many thousands of homes. That's what I dreamed of creating.
But it remained a dream.
Yes, it remained a dream. Listen. Down there by the river, the factories hum. My factories. Listen how they hum. The night shifts are working. They work both night and day. Listen, listen. The wheels whirl and the pistons thud round and round, in and out. Can't you hear them, Ella?
No.
I hear them.
No, John. You can't.
Ah. But these are only the outworks surrounding the kingdom.
What kingdom?
My kingdom. The kingdom I was about to take possession of when I died.
John.
There it lies, defenseless, masterless, abandoned to thieves and robbers. Ella, do you see those mountains far away? Range beyond range, rising and towering. That is my infinite and inexhaustible kingdom.
Ah, but it's a cold wind that blows from that kingdom, John.
To me, it's the breath of life. It's a greeting from the spirits that serve me. I feel them. Those buried millions, I see those veins of iron ore stretching their branching, enticing arms toward me. I've seen you all before, like shadows brought to life. That night when I stood in the vaults of the bank with the lantern in my hand. You wanted to be freed, and I tried to free you. But I failed. Your treasure sank back into the darkness. But let me whisper to you now, in the stillness of the night, I love you where you lie like the dead, deep down in the dark. I love you. Treasures that crave for life with your bright retinue of power and glory. I love you. I love you. I love you.
Yes. Your love is still buried down there, John. It always has been. But up here, in the daylight, there was a warm, living heart beating for you. And you broke it. Worse, you sold it for
The kingdom, the power and the glory, you mean?
That is what I mean. And therefore I prophesy, John Gabriel Borkman, that you will never get the price you demanded for that murder. You will never ride triumphant into your cold kingdom.
I fear you are jealous.
You must not fear that, John. It will be better for you.
Oh. Now it let go of me.
Well, what is it, John?
The ice that gripped my heart.
John, you felt that hand of ice now.
No. Not the hand of ice. A hand of iron.
Rest quietly. John, I'll go for help. No. John. Better so, John Borkman. Better so. For you.
Yes, yes, madam. Here are their footprints.
Yes, there they are, over on that seat. Ella?
Are you looking for us?
What else could I do?
He is here, Gunhild.
Asleep?
A long, deep sleep, I am afraid.
Was it deliberate?
No.
Not by his own hand, then?
No, a hand of iron gripped his heart.
Go for help. Get some people from the farm.
Very good, madam. God in heaven.
So, the night air killed him.
So it seems.
that strong man.
Won't you look at him?
No, no. John Gabriel Borkman was a miner's son. He couldn't live in the fresh air.
I think it was the cold that killed him.
The cold? That killed him long ago.
And turned us into shadows.
Yes.
One dead man and two shadows. See what the cold has done?
Yes. The coldest of the heart. And now I think we two can join hands, Ella.
I think we can. No.
We twin sisters, over the man we both loved.
We two shadows over the dead man.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Amazing. So that was the last full play he wrote. Now we've overrun, I'm afraid, so we're just going to jump to the very end. The last thing he wrote was When We Dead Awaken, and what's moving about this one is that it's a similar story, but it's about an artist who betrayed a young woman who was his model for his most famous sculpture when he was a young man, and she loved him, and he used her and all that, and he completely loses. He left her, and years later, he's in his 60s, 70s, and he meets her again in a spa, and she's already half mad by this time. But somehow they're reconciled. The play's called When We Dead Awaken, and it's as if Ibsen, towards the end of his life, suddenly was still hoping for a resurrection. And this is the final scene.
Did you hear that, Arnold? They are coming up here to fetch me. Men coming here.
Be calm, Irene.
And she, the one in black, she'll come too. She must have missed me long ago by now. She'll take hold of my arms, Arnold, and put me in the straitjacket. She's got it with her in the trunk. I've seen it.
No one will be allowed to touch you.
Oh no, I've a way to stop them.
What do you mean?
This.
A knife?
Always, always, day and night. In bed, too.
Give me the knife, Irene.
I meant it for you, Arnold.
For me?
As we were sitting there last night, down by the Tornitzer Sea.
The Tornitzer...
Outside the farmhouse, playing at swans and water lilies.
Go on.
I heard you say, clear as ice, cold as the grave, that I was only an episode in your life.
You said that, Irene, not I.
I took out my knife. I was going to stick it in your back.
Why didn't you?
I suddenly realized you were already dead. You'd been dead for years.
Dead?
Dead, like me. We sat there by the Tornitzer Sea, two clammy corpses, playing our little game together.
I don't call that death. But you don't understand me.
Then where is the burning passion you fought against when I stood naked before you as the woman rising from the dead?
Our love is not dead, Irene.
The love which belongs to our life on earth, that beautiful, miraculous, so full of riddles. That love is dead in us both.
I tell you, that love burns as passionately in me now as it ever did.
And I? Have you forgotten who I am now?
Whoever you are, whatever you are to me, you are only the woman I see in my dreams of you.
I have stood on a stage naked and showed my body to hundreds of men since you.
I was blind. I drove you to it. I set that dead figure of clay above life and happiness and love.
Too late. It's too late.
Nothing that has happened since has cheapened you one whit in my eyes.
Nor in mine.
Well then, we are free. There is still time for us to live, Irene.
The desire to live died in me, Arnold. Now I am risen from the dead and look for you and find you. See that you are dead and life is dead, as I have been.
No, you are wrong, wrong. Both in us and around us, life rages as fiercely and joyfully as ever.
The woman whom you created, rising from the dead, sees life cold and lying on its bier.
Then let us, two dead people, live life to the full for one short hour before we go down again into our grave.
Arnold.
But not here, in this half darkness, not here with this hideous dank shroud flapping around us.
No, no, up into the light where glory shines, up to the promised mountaintop.
Up there we shall celebrate our wedding feast, Irene, my beloved.
The sun may look on us, Arnold.
All the powers of light may look on us, and all the powers of darkness too. Will you come with me now, my bride of grace?
Freely and willingly, my lord and master.
First we must pass through the mist, Irene, and then...
Through the mist, yes, and then up to the top of our tower, where it shines in the sunrise.
Good. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you. Okay, so that's the end of the last thing that Ibsen wrote, and you can see that we're back on mountaintops. We're back at where he started with Peer Gynt and Brand, desperate to heal the wounds that he's made, the mistakes he's made as a man. And that's the extraordinary thing. It's all in Brand and it's all in Peer Gynt. The whole arc of his plays are all contained in those two wonderful plays. I want to say a massive, massive thank you to all my actors. I'm sorry we've overrun again. But you can see what an extraordinary playwright this man was. And there's loads of plays that I haven't touched on, but you can see why he's still one of the greatest, why everything has been influenced by him. But you can also see how no one has really surpassed him. Do you know what I mean? They're still sensational plays, but they only work if you commit to their passion and their heart and their soul. And these people who want to live their life completely, totally, somehow uniting as they do at the end, their love, spirituality, God, sexuality, all of it. So I want to say a massive thanks to all my actors. I'm not going to list their names because every time I do it, I forget someone, which is really awkward. So huge thanks to everyone for taking part. And thank you very much. I'll see you soon. Much, much love. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
Strindberg. All right.
Thank
Take care.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.